in agriculture and what people might need to know about them through COVID-19. So we thought as we recorded this, we try to go live on Facebook all at the same time. So I'm Paul Geringer. I'm the Extension Legal Specialist here in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at the University of Maryland. And if I can get all of this technology to work, I'm also a part of the Ag Law Education Initiative. We're a project with the Carey School of Law, College Park, through the College of Ag, where I'm located at, and UMES School of Agriculture and Natural Sciences. With UMES, there's our Facebook page, regular page, Twitter, email. We're a signature program within University of Maryland Extension. We're funded by Empowering the State, and I will leave that up here for a second or two so you can look at it in the video. So we also, through my department, do a blog at agris.umd.edu where a lot of this stuff that I'm going to talk about. Where a lot of this stuff that I'm going to talk about is located at, and you can find that, especially the publication that I'm going to share here in a minute and should be up in the Facebook part, is available as well there. I also do a podcast, so if you enjoy the sound of my voice, you can find that at that link right there. None of this is legal advice. I'm glad we're all good with that. I'm going to keep going. And the last thing I need to say is this is all based on some work that myself, Elizabeth Thilmany, and Majeure Suri pulled all this together, and the publication is there, and that's the link that should be, if you're watching this on Facebook, that's in the Facebook post as well. So let's talk a little bit about what force majeure clauses are. So we have this global economic shutdown that's been caused by COVID-19. We may have ag producers, processors, other parties that are looking at canceling contracts that need to be canceled due to the shutdown. We often see contracts that have these provisions that allow parties to cancel them in limited cases, and we're going to talk about what that means, because we pretty much have to look at what the language is used within the clause itself to be able to understand what can allow it to be canceled and what will not allow it to be canceled. One example of this is this force majeure clause. So you may be asking yourself, what is a force majeure clause? Well, it's a French term. It means superior force. It can often apply when there's unforeseen events that occur that prevent completing of the contract in some way. We often hear these referred to as an act of God clause. The idea is usually this unforeseeable event is usually something that either, could potentially be caused by forces outside of our control in some way, and it provides an excuse not to fulfill the contract at that point. So let's talk about an example, and I'm going to give you this example to start with because I think it's going to help as we look at a clause itself, or an example of a clause. We have a farmer who has a contract to supply leafy greens to a restaurant. The restaurant is forced to close and cancel due to the COVID-19 restrictions on restaurants. So what happens? Well, we go to the contract, and this following provision is in the contract. This contract is subject to the force majeure and is contingent on strikes, accidents, acts of God, weather conditions, epidemics, inability to secure labor, fire regulations, or restrictions imposed by any government or governmental agency, or other delays beyond the control of the parties. So what does all this mean? Well, if we put it in there, one party may decide to, they can't deliver. The restaurant may not be able to accept delivery if it happens. The farmer may not have enough labor to be able to harvest a crop to even deliver it if the restaurant needed it. So if one of these parties does it and, decides not to, that can be one of the cases that happens. We would just come back together at some point and continue to deliver under the contract when conditions change, or we have a new contract, or we have to look at other things, which is go to court. If we go back and look at this, we have the words epidemic in here, and we have government restrictions in there. It's potentially going to apply if both parties do not agree to, suspend the contract due to whatever the current situation is. So what happens when we go to court? Courts are really going to look at that language. I just kind of highlighted this. If we're looking at this, the words epidemics or regulations or restrictions imposed by any government or government agency, that gives us pretty good cover that potentially this clause does apply, and it's going to provide, some sort of necessary ability for a court to interpret it to say, yes, this clause applies, it applies in this situation, and here are the possible remedies that could happen because of it. The other thing we have to look at is, what's your reason for not completing the contract? Is it a legal, physical, or economic reason? Guess what? One of these three is bad on this list, and it's the third one. It has to be a legal or a physical restraint that's preventing you from completing the contract. It can't be an economic reason. So if we go back and look at this, we got a leafy green contract. We're saying we're going to deliver leafy greens to the restaurant. Well, we have a legal restriction that says we can't potentially because the restaurant can't really open. Or we have some sort of physical restraints. Basically, the epidemic may be preventing us from physically being able to go and deliver the product in some way, either through government restrictions or something else. So either way, it seems like, based on the clause I put together, it applies in this situation. Now, what happens, if the restaurant's still able to open everything, we're still in the same situation. Restaurant still needs leafy greens, still producing the same amount of food, delivering, whatever. And it just bought leafy greens at too high in the market, and now the leafy green market's lower. Well, it can't cancel it just because prices have changed and now it could buy leafy greens at a lower rate. That's not a good reason to ever cancel a contract. You negotiated something, you got to live with it. We're only looking at, is something legal or physically restraining you from doing it, not you just put together a contract at the wrong price for whatever the market was later on. So to kind of wrap all this up and do as quickly as I can, what should you be doing when you review contracts and determine if they have force majeure contracts? You need to look to see what the language is, how it's being provided. Work with the parties to see if, we can apply this clause without going to court. There might be some issues going on that may not cause it, that may cause one of the parties not to want to, work with you on this. Determine if that language is in there for either epidemic, pandemic, restrictions from the pandemic. It may not be as clear as you want it to be. My clause is not as clear as you might want it to be to spell out exactly what's going to happen. The other thing to think about is, based on this, what do you want contracts to say in the future, and what do they need to have? Because if we're going to live with this for a few years, maybe we need to be thinking about that going on in the future. If you do have a contract that has been canceled, you probably need to talk to an attorney to determine if there are any legal rights at this point, to determine what needs to happen. This is an issue to where, if things are not always clear, we may not know. This may be something that may take a while to work through to figure out what the exact legal responsibilities are. The other thing to do is work with the attorney to figure out, in the future, do I need to include this language in my contract? Is this a problem? Is this something I need to think about? And then the other question we don't really know about is, as we're looking at the USDA programs that were announced last week through the CARES Act, how is USDA going to treat some of these canceled contracts for certain producers in proving value? Are you going to have to prove value, or is it just going to be set up like other programs? We don't know the answer to that just yet. So I want to thank all of you that might be listening to this now or watching the video later. And I'm going to flash my contact info up on the screen, so if folks want to contact me later, they can. I'll leave that up for just a second as I slowly. And thank you all for listening today.